Back to Bioinsights. Today we're going to explore uh, biotechnology, movement science, and human performance. I'm your host, Marcelo. Today we're talking to the founder of NeuFit, Garrett Salpeter. He's a physicist, an engineer, and a neuroscience-driven entrepreneur. He's really redefined how the body heals and adapts to performance. Really excited to talk about how he decided to look at a problem in a different way, where he was looking at the body's operating system, and really his question was, is it a mechanical issue or is it a brain issue, a nervous system issue? So really, it led him down a path that I'm really excited for him to share. NeuFit is the company. The product that he uses to deliver this type of technology is an FDA cleared technology that helps everyone really with chronic pain. So we'll talk about some cool stories of pro athletes, but also patients, real world patients, and how these clinical outcomes really have given the nervous system an update in coding, if you may. So with that being said, welcome and thank you for taking the time to talk to me today. And to help us get started, why don't we start with your basically your early in your college life, you were a hockey athlete, and a specific moment at that time really kind of caused you to look at this in a different way. So why don't you start with the story of how you founded the company?
Will do, Marcelo. It's great to see you again, and thank you for having me on here. And you mentioned that I had this question of how much of pain and injury is, mechanical or sort of in what I would say the hardware of the body, right? The structures and tissues versus the software, the brain and nervous system. And the reason I'm so passionate about that line of inquiry and that distinction is because of an experience I had in college. As you mentioned, I was playing hockey and I had an injury where I had some torn ligaments. I was told that I would actually need to have surgery to repair them. And this is coming on the background of having had multiple other prior injuries before that and being so disappointed, disenchanted, disenfranchised with the traditional physical therapy and traditional orthopedic medical models. And so I had, all that disappointment. And so when this happened, I was just sort of down in the dumps thinking, okay, they said I need surgery. I'm probably going to need surgery. And then through this just fortuitous, wonderful set of circumstances, I was introduced by a friend of a friend to someone who was using, a practitioner who was using older versions of electrical stimulation using direct current. And it's a device that had a bunch of analog dials and knobs on it and stuff like that. And then working with the nervous system, he was doing functional neurology. So he was looking at the nervous system and how it responds to injury and how that response does or does not support and influence the healing process. And long story short, I ended up being able to heal my ligaments and avoid surgery. And I was happy and relieved, as an athlete, as a college student, to not have to have a surgery. But as a physics major and a pre-engineering student and someone who, was really, really had that engineering problem solving mindset, to find an approach that actually made sense scientifically from first principles, looking at managing this neurological response, using these direct current electric fields to influence the internal processes of healing and regeneration, like that, it just made so much sense to me. And it was such a wonderful, epiphany to really have this experience that it really set me off on a whole different trajectory in my life. I was already set to come to engineering graduate school at the University of Texas. So I was at school in New England, came down to Austin, Texas for graduate school. And while I, probably should have been in the engineering lab doing my thesis work, I was actually, because of this experience and because of the passion I had for physiology and the human body, I was networking in the sports medicine world and ended up connecting with the guy who was the chiropractor for the Longhorns football team. We had a private practice in town as well. And so I rented a 120 square foot room and worked, essentially underneath him for as a young early 20s kid,
Wow.
started a business treating people using older versions of electrical stimulation. And then that sort of launched me on this journey where I still thought professionally I'd be an engineer, and this was just sort of a side thing, but I just kept doing this. And over several years with my engineering background, kept seeing ways I wanted to improve the technology. And then I also went back for additional graduate work in neuroscience as I got more and more passionate about this work. And eventually that led me to, after 7 or 8 years of doing that work, that led me to the realization that, instead of what I originally thought I would do, which was, maybe expand by opening a couple of clinics around town, it just became clear to me, again, through a whole variety of reasons and circumstances, that what I really had to do was actually, create a device. So although I didn't set out to be the founder of a medical device company, that's where it went.
So you had the experience of working with DC stimulus. What what started that process of looking at this problem that everyone else, like what did you think everyone was missing? Because eStim is common, right? But it's not what you're using here. eStim is an AC current. So people that are listening, there's protective mechanisms in your, and it causes a cold contraction in your muscle, and everyone's who's had probably some type of physical therapy has experienced that, and they feel these abnormal contractions and stinging sensations and but DC is a little different. So when you experienced that and you were hurt, what what did you feel like everyone was missing? Did you feel like, hey, this affected my pain differently? This affected my performance differently? Well, I'm able to do things that should take 4 to 6 weeks longer. What were those self-imposed limits that you saw as well?
The thing that strikes me the most throughout this entire journey is the contrast. I mentioned I had traditional physical therapy and had been through treatment for prior injuries, and I had used electrical stimulation before in PT clinics, chiropractic offices, and it was just the stim and ice or stim and heat, where I'd lie down, and if my back hurt, they just put it on my back and let me lie there, and it would just have some sort of general tonic effect. But it really didn't do much. And there was this sort of, even if it was, unspoken, spoken by some, unspoken by others, but this sort of general understanding that electrical stimulation was very limited, that it was just that, it could help people feel a little bit better. It could, do a little bit around the edges, but it was very limited. And there was, during that time, and still continuing forward now, there was a trend also for insurance companies to stop covering, either reducing the reimbursement rate or stop covering altogether, electrical stimulation treatments for that reason, because there just wasn't very much value in it. So there's that backdrop.
No measurable outcome.
Yeah, exactly. Beautifully said. So there's the backdrop of that, generally speaking across the board, that type of scenario. And then my experience, and it's just a night and day difference. It's a complete 180-degree shift. And so how do I sort of make sense of that? Well, one was, there was a clear distinction between direct current and alternating current, which you already referenced there, Marcelo. And so I really leaned into that, and I started using, I found some older versions of direct current stimulation. There were issues where you couldn't turn it up as high because there was discomfort, and there were things, sometimes it was more like microcurrents, and there's different things. And so I started really experimenting with it, sort of taking my engineering mindset into the realm of physical medicine, and working under this chiropractor or working with other clinicians and stuff like that, because I myself am I'm not a clinician, but I've ended up working with literally thousands of clients and putting in my 10,000 hours and learning a lot of those skills along the way. But I really felt called to share that work with as many people as I could. And I originally set out wanting to give people like me the experiences I wished I had growing up, in terms of having the tools and strategies to recover faster from injuries, ideally to prevent them in the first place. But when they do happen, as they, almost inevitably do, being able to have these profound, inspiring, energizing recovery experiences. And so I wanted to really change the paradigm, and that sort of just that experience really lit the fire within me, or created this calling to really share that work with as many people as I could. And so I set out and, was treating people. And as I mentioned, I kept seeing ways, I was reading textbooks on electrophysiology and kept seeing ways in terms of the underlying technology as things were advancing, kept seeing things. And then, eventually I had all these different experiences that finally led me to the whole conclusion that I had to start advice. But I had a client actually who is a patent attorney, and I treated him and helped him. He had really bad knee pain and was going to withdraw from a marathon that weekend. I treated him on Monday, treated him on Wednesday. He went and ran in the marathon on Saturday, and then the following week he comes back in and we started talking. I told him some of my ideas, and he was like, you probably could get a patent on that and on this. And that was really the thing that I was like, okay, maybe I will do this. So I was actually in a PhD program in neuroscience at the time, and I ended up taking a leave of absence. So I did not complete the PhD, but I ended up, deciding that what I wanted to do when I grew up was launch that product. So I started developing that, and I'm glad I didn't know how long it was going to take and how expensive it would be when I first started. I kind of felt that I may not have done it. Of course, I'm glad I did. Yeah, so that was sort of some more pieces rounding out the journey to really conceive of and start this thing.
So you put in, it sounds like, it sounds like a really cool story of practice-based evidence that you established. Then along the way, you started doing some research-based practice to validate certain things as well. You've obviously, if whoever goes to the website, which I'll put in the show notes as well, what I really liked about this whole process of learning about the Newbie unit was that there is an assessment, almost a scanning process to it. What are you looking for, and how does it help you figure out what's actually wrong? Because that's a really cool thing that I like about the DC component to this. And I think that's where the measurable outcomes happen as well.
Yeah. So great topic there. First, just one quick mention. You talked about, kind of practice based and then research based, and that's one of the interesting parts of this story. Since we launched the product, approximately 8 years ago, as the time you and I are having this conversation. Initially, it was based a lot on my learning and research and experience and research that I read in just electrophysiology. There's a rich history of electrical stimulation, right? So we're standing on the shoulders of giants. When it comes to direct current, there was very limited work in humans. There were some, but it was limited. And then there was also research using direct current in mice and rabbits, for tissue regeneration and stuff like that. And so I had some of these frameworks in mind, but our work was still very much in that anecdotal realm. And so there's some of these early innovators who the concept lands with them, or they feel it, or they see a patient outcome and they're willing to try it. The kind of few percent on the frontier in that domain who are more open-minded. In every domain, there's sort of this, innovator, early adopter, and then late adopter and majority, right? This sort of product adoption trend.
They cross the chasm eventually.
Exactly, crossing the. That's right, crossing the chasm. That's the book that describes that phenomenon. Yeah. So and then along the way, we've made an effort. That's actually how we met for the first time, Marcelo. Was in your prior company. We were doing a study together with the wearable technology, looking at the effects on the nervous system of the direct current stimulation. So that's one of the things that we've really built along the way is, initially it was case study realm, and then it was randomized controlled trials, really building the research, the body of evidence. And we've done the first studies comparing head to head in humans, alternating current versus direct current. So it's been really cool to see that build along the way. And of course, there's a large number of people out there in physical therapy who do want to wait until there's published research and wait for that sort of, to catch up, so to speak. And thankfully we're catching up.
They're dogma driven. And I feel like the challenge there for that space in servicing that community has always been um, reimbursement. You mentioned it before. They have to fulfill a certain requirement to get that reimbursement. I'm not going to reinvent the wheel, but then you have a whole other community that's also not that needs to show some of their work and to fulfill that, but they're really committed to value-based care. And I'm not saying that all clinicians are not. I'm just saying that they're very dogma-driven in that it's how they were taught in school. So
Mhm.
the wildest thing, as you mentioned before, though originally small world, um, we met in this case study where we looked at the power value of a group and how direct current affected their heart rate variability. And it was simply because the type of current affects, so the people that understand and if they want to know a little bit more about it, is AC current is sympathetic. DC current is parasympathetic. So people can listen to that. Well, what's associated with parasympathetic? It's usually it reduces stress, cortisol levels. You can actually improve your HRV that way. And in the power values, we showed that. If I remember correctly, I think it was a little over power value. It was really high. We had about, I think, 30 to 35 people in the study, if I remember correctly. Um, but we implemented the protocols that you recommended, and we showed those values. And it was really, really cool to see uh, those responses in case studies initially. And I think a lot of companies have to actually take those small wins and do those applications. They have to put their, what's possible and how is that even possible, right? They have to take the bull by the horn and actually take the research sometimes out of a square room and put it out remotely. And that was the really cool thing about what we offered as a wearable device company. We literally took our units and put them at their homes along with wearable devices half the time. So studies like that are really impactful to actually show people in real life, real world applications. So uh, a little bit about the AC and DC current. I know that we look at we look at certain protective mechanisms, muscle spindles and GTO, and how it responds to that stimulus with E-stim and how it causes those contractions and what people feel. Can you elaborate a little bit more about DC and what it does, and kind of helps kind of reset in some cases that muscle contraction or recruitment?
Yeah, for sure. And that gets back to you had mentioned, a moment ago also the mapping process where we take one of the electrodes and if you're listening, you can't see me, but if you're watching, you can see I'm actually taking an electrode and scanning it around on my, shoulder and chest, pec muscle here. You actually would take an electrode and literally scan around. And what we're doing there is using the effects of direct current to, instead of just causing muscles to contract everywhere like you would get with alternating current, we're actually sending sensory neurological signals into the nervous system and up to the spinal cord and brain. And those signals are essentially the same signals that would happen if you're moving or loading or stretching or challenging that tissue anyway. So you're getting those same, for the clinicians listening who know terms like the muscle spindle, the Golgi tendon organ, like you mentioned, Marcelo, for the clinicians listening, we're actually stimulating those same mechanoreceptors. If you don't understand what those terms mean, that's no problem. It basically is little sensors in the muscle that sense the load or the amount of tension or force, or sensors that sense the length and the stretching of the muscles. And they basically are there to make sure that we don't exert too much force and injure the muscle or stretch too far and injure the muscle or the tendon or stuff like that. And so what we're doing, so because those are essentially protective mechanisms, what that does is those, if we're overly sedentary, if we don't use our bodies as efficiently as possible over time, those protective mechanisms get set too conservatively. And those are the underlying neurological mechanisms for why we get stiff and let lose range of motion and lose function and get weaker over time and stuff like that. And so what we can do is actually scan around and find precisely where those patterns are dysfunctional, or where there's guarding in response to an injury, and where muscles are being shut down because of injury or just because of bad habits developed over time. So we actually scan around those. And then once we find those areas, we can send this signal, this direct current signal in there to accelerate the process of neuromuscular reeducation. So you're re-educating or retraining, repatterning the neurological control in those areas. And what we're really doing there is essentially a form of exposure therapy. So if you think about it like this: if we find a hot spot in somebody's quad muscle, what that tells us is that that person is essentially trying to resist load in that area. So when they go to run, every step they take, they're going to be sort of rotating around or leaning away from that leg. And that, of course, is going to be causing compensation patterns, or it is a compensation pattern where they're going to be loading other areas. And that could be problematic for, say, the knee joint or the hip joint or the lower back, because that quad, if that's not working properly and absorbing force, then instead of loading directly over that knee, there's going to be probably more torsion at the knee or hip, and that can go up into the back or down to the foot and ankle as well. So there's these different things that can happen. And so what we're doing then is we're sending the signal where we found that hot spot or that dysfunction. We're going to send a signal there and teach the body, teach the nervous system and the brain to start allowing or accepting load on that area in that tissue, so that it no longer has to compensate around it as much. So you can really accelerate this process of that re-education, of retraining. So it's essentially a form of, exposure therapy. Like if someone was, I don't know, if someone had been in a traumatic car accident and was like afraid, had, PTSD about getting in a car, just getting in a car was scary. You wouldn't say, all right, just go out and drive on the highway. You'd say, okay, let's go sit in the car in a parking lot and just breathe and relax. And that's the first day. And then maybe drive around that parking lot the next day. And then maybe drive around a neighborhood the following day. And then maybe go out and drive on a busy highway. You kind of ramp up to it. It's graduated exposure. And we can do the same thing neurologically with the same signals that control those movements. So you're actually working on the underlying software operating system that handles, that controls, that signals, that monitors all of those movements.
Great explanation. It's the progression of therapy, and but the scanning solution is really powerful to be able to map it. And I always look at movement screening or mechanical screening, and you could look at it somewhat subjectively. It's powerful when you could identify where you are weak in that kinetic chain, or to your point, where the software needs debugging or resetting to be able to create a better experience from what normally has been done. You've had some really cool athletes. You've worked with several NFL, NBA players, as well as NCAA and many other players as well. One is obviously Saquon Barkley, former Giant. I hate saying he's an Eagle, but what are these athletes telling you differently about what this type of PT treatment compared to what they were used to?
Yes, working with Saquon was a cool experience. It was back when he played for the Giants, when he tore his ACL. I know you remember, Marcelo. Your listeners may recall. In maybe 2021 or two, he tore his ACL, and it's interesting. He had a more serious surgery because there were other structures beyond the ACL that were damaged, and he was doing the best rehab. And at the 5-month mark, he was still struggling, still stiff, still had some pain, still had some weakness. And we started working with him, and he, graciously did a video for us describing his experience, wanted to share it with others. And he talks about how in his first session, he felt his quad muscle wake up for the first time since surgery, first time in, at that point, 5 or 6 months. And
Wow.
it changed the trajectory of his recovery. But that was the biggest thing for him, was feeling that immediate, like being in a dark room and all of a sudden turning on the lights. It was that type of sensation for him. Excuse me. And that, thankfully, it wasn't just a one-time thing or a trick or something like that, but it actually literally changed the trajectory of his recovery. If you look at his functional scores on these various tests, he had sort of plateaued on the one that his surgeon uses, a lower extremity functional scale. He was stuck at about in the low 20s, 22 or 23 out of 50. And over the first 7 weeks that he was using the NeuFit device, the Newbie neurobioelectric stimulator, over those first 7 weeks, he went from a 23 to like a 47 or 48 out of 50. It literally changed the trajectory of the whole recovery. And he talks about how, because he liked the way it allowed him to really activate his muscles, he uses it still for ongoing activation, warming up, before going out to play and stuff like that, because it ramps up that nervous system and makes sure the right muscles are working to do the job. Like you talk about, Marcelo, when there was weakness in the biomechanical chains, or
Yeah.
the concept, at least, and not the exact words. Those movement patterns. Our brain sends a signal down saying, okay, we want to walk, we want to run, we want to jump, and then the nervous system essentially translates those commands into various electrical signals, and it chooses movement patterns based on what's rehearsed and what's comfortable and what's available. And what we can do is, essentially change and optimize those so it will use the more efficient pattern, the one that's less likely to create injury, the one that's more likely to increase power and strength and speed and range of motion and efficiency and fluidity of movement, etc. So it's about changing that. And yeah, there's other athletes. I know. Yeah, obviously you're talking about the Giants. You got the Knicks hat on the shelf there behind you. So Karl Anthony Towns is another guy who's currently a Knick, a big part of the success that they're having, and he used it for a couple of things. He had a knee injury of his own. He had separately had a torn calf muscle back when he was playing for the Timberwolves, and he used it to recover weeks ahead of schedule to be able to play in the playoffs the year they had a run and made it to the conference finals. So I think we hear the same sorts of things from those guys and others about being able to, feel changes within a session. There's so many times, even in pro sports, let alone general population, where, people go in for a therapy appointment and they have experiences like I did back when I was describing my disappointing physical therapy experiences. They have experiences where, they're just kind of going through the motions. You invest the time, the energy, the money to go there, but you don't really have any return on that investment of effort and see improvement. So they like that you can actually see tangible progress, in the first session and many sessions thereafter. And you actually get, if you're going to put in the time and the effort, it's nice to actually feel like you're accomplishing something and getting some sort of return on that investment.
The other cool story that I read about use cases that you guys have is Parkinson's disease, as well as people with cardiovascular diseases, could be certain types of comorbidities, but it also shows that the same impact, right? You're looking at the screen, you're looking at their movement quality, you're looking at points of spasticity for PD, right? And for, faulty recruitment patterns, and then just how, giving them the ability of being more independent. Like I deal with fall risk mitigation a lot with certain population sets. Personally, I have this month will be a 90-year-old father. It's concerning with that population set and quality of movement, but also giving them independence. Can you talk a little bit about, is it different or is it pretty much the same? Because I think, in all honesty, I know the answer. It's the human body is the human body. The age is the difference, but their movement qualities are different. And does it still respond the same way, I guess, is the best question.
So you mentioned Parkinson's, for example, there, and we have some really good case studies and are doing some actually more formal scientific research on Parkinson's, and we're seeing things like improvements in some steadiness of movement and reducing tremors, and improvements in gait and spasticity, and also improvements in sleep qualities. The one of the effects of Parkinson's or MS or things like that often is very significant and may not get talked about as much is how it impairs sleep quality. And of course, sleep is so vitally important for our health and ability to recover. And if there's going to be any chance of healing or repair or regeneration, right, sleep is when it's going to happen. And if you're not able to sleep as well, that's a huge problem. So we're actually seeing some improvements in Parkinson's patient in the duration and quality of their sleep also. And, part of that is to say that there's this whole opportunity to help patients that are, have these more neurological injuries or neurodegenerative conditions. And we have a published study I mentioned that we had done some of the first work comparing head-to-head alternating current versus direct current in humans. And so the study I'm referring to there was the first one is the work that we did with diabetic peripheral neuropathy. And these are, patients, average age was 74, patients in their 70s for whom it's been written off, they can never really heal in any meaningful way. It's just about pain reduction, symptom management. And with the alternating current group, that's what happened. But with the direct current group, we saw these, actual functional improvements and increases in nerve conduction, velocity, and EMG amplitude. So actually measuring the electrical activity in nerves, we're seeing improvements there. So there's some sort of regeneration happening. So there's an ability in these populations where there's neurodegeneration. It's not just you do one treatment, but it's longer term, attempting to create enough stimulus and input to tap into the power of neuroplasticity for adaptations happening long term over time. And there we've seen tremendous progress. And then we also see progress acutely and immediately with athletes who have just had injury or just had surgery. And it's like, and then we have chronic pain patients and stuff like that. And to your question, Marcelo, there's sort of a little bit of this this area where people may wonder, well, how are you like everything to everybody? Is this a panacea or something like that? And, no, we are able to help all these people because there is a common thread throughout all of those, throughout acute injury and chronic pain and these neurodegenerative conditions. And that common thread, of course, is the nervous system. And so we're working with the nervous system sometimes in slightly different ways or using slightly different frameworks, but ultimately it's about communicating with the nervous system, identifying any areas of deficiency and attempting to increase function where needed or decrease or calm function where it might be excessive.
I look at this as a tool that's essential to be able to assess, identify, and then monitor over a period of time. Is it the end all be all? No, it's one great important device that helps on the business side, right? Patient arrival, patient engagement, um, on a gym owner. Hey, now I have a meaningful tool that could really help in positioning myself differentiating myself, and showing the community that we could help in not replacing clinicians, but being able to make sure that over a period of time, they can practice good quality movement. And it's not, again, it's just a great tool in the toolbox that if I was going to look at this, thinking as a business owner or as a clinician, those are things that matter for me. And what I always look at, currently now in a PT space, is CMS has made it challenging for reimbursement. So cash PT is something that I think is essential. And for me, this product also fits that model. So I think people need to look at this besides from a clinician standpoint. It is not the only tool. It's not what we're saying. What we're saying is there a good way at being able to screen people more effectively, and then get proper muscle recruitment, because that bad motor program, once injury's in place, it doesn't go away once you do any type of recovery. It's still going to have that protective mechanism in place, essentially. So you need to figure out, how to reset that. And this is a great tool to do that with. So, what do you see, like out of all those examples, where do you see people are getting wrong first when they start using this type of approach?
I think that was a beautiful description. Can you just say that one more time? Where people are, you say
Like
getting off?
what do you see people getting wrong when they first start using this approach? Because I gave a whole lot
Uh-huh.
of an overview, but like, what are some things that you're like, all right, they get the product, where do they make their first mistakes in starting to use this approach?
So it's a fair question. Of course, I'd love to say that, people get it and they just immediately understand how to use it and just start getting these amazing home run outcomes with every single patient that walks through the door. Of course, that's not true with this or, with anything that I'm aware of. And there is a learning curve. There's a methodology to it, learning to use this mapping process, learning to do some of our other techniques, whether it be for parasympathetic, vagus nerve stimulation, or whether it be for combining it with manual therapy, hooking up to our electric glove. There's different things. But with this mapping process, it can be a little bit intimidating at first to understand how to interpret the various what we would call hotspots that one might find. You scan around. If you find one or two that just stand out, then it's like, okay, easy. Let's just work on those one or two. If you find 8 to 10, it's like, okay, what's our algorithm here for prioritizing what we're going to work first, and how do we approach that? And then having the conviction in the process, the confidence and clarity and certainty to be able to turn people up, because the process typically works best when the provider is pushing their patient to go outside of the patient's own comfort zone. It's all subjective based on the patient's own individual experience. And there's a skill to being able to coach the patient to understand, like, yes, I'm going to push you to the point where it's uncomfortable, and there's a reason and a purpose for that. And getting comfortable doing that sometimes can be different, certainly a lot different than okay, we're just going to turn it up to you first feel it and leave it here with an ice pack on or a heat pack on, right? It's just a different kind of paradigm. So I think there is some of that. And then there's also, understanding the expectations around how people are going to respond, because you work with one patient and all of a sudden they feel 70 or 80% better after the first session, and you kind of start to expect that and get used to it. And then someone else only has a little bit of improvement, and it's like, well, did I fail? Or sometimes no, it's more their issue is actually more about tissue healing. Like you talked about, Marcelo, there's both. There's the tissue that may need to heal, and then there's also the neurological response to that injury. And based on how someone responds, there's a little bit of diagnostic value in the sense that you can tell how much of it is that neurological response versus how much of it is, there's going to need to be some time for this tissue to heal. In both cases, we can help. The time course and the expectations are just going to be a little bit different. So there's sort of that kind of getting comfortable with the process and learning to make sense of what's happening with the patient or the client in front of you, learning to get comfortable with the techniques, stuff like that. And then, of course, there's times when, someone's joint degeneration is just too far gone. You won't be able to help them as much, and they are going to need that joint replacement after all. There's times when I think surgeries are often overdone, but there's times when they're necessary, and thank goodness we have skilled surgeons. And, so I think there's certainly a learning curve, like there is to become a physical therapist or a personal trainer or a strength coach or an athletic trainer, right? There's a learning curve in all of those things. And we do our best to give people that 80-20 of training where we bring them up to speed, but it certainly takes some effort and diligence.
I understand that. I can relate to that. I think selling to that community, different types of technology in my life, that's been the biggest challenge. Is everyone thinks if they just buy it, all of a sudden it's just going to manifest, and it is not that simple. You have to actually implement it because your population set's a little different, but also the skill sets are all different, and you might find that this protocol is not really as important as this other protocol. So I hope that's a really important kernel of knowledge that you just kind of enlightened everyone on there. Um, Kind of now pivoting towards the future. Where do you see this field heading? And what's the bigger vision for you right now?
There's a few parts to that. I mean, I think, gosh, it is a very exciting time to be alive. There is a bit of a doom and gloom perspective of if AI takes over everything, what do we do? And I think the flip side to that, and what I encourage people to focus on, is the degree to which AI and technology gives us all literally what can best be described as superpowers, and it can allow us to be more efficient and give us more time and bandwidth and attention to focus on higher value, more inspiring, more human things and areas and tasks. So I think, I think it's a very exciting time. Certainly AI is a huge thing right now, and seeing how that's going to augment, it's certainly replace some of the administrative burdens in the medical world, and seeing how it's going to augment our skills and abilities in other areas, I think is really fascinating and exciting.
Yeah, it is super scary, no doubt. I agree with you. AI is definitely the, I guess, buzzword trend that you're hearing. And technology now, hardware specifically, provides a lot of data, and one individual sometimes can't consume all that data as effectively as an algorithm with a large learning model that can help identify things faster, and it helps maybe a practitioner be able to spend more time with that quality human interaction and say, well, this is, and the governance and agency will still lie with the human. That's where I think is the more vital thing about AI. Everyone wants to doom and gloom it, but if we can protect and make sure that the governance lies with the professional and the agency and the data is protected, then I think there is a great way to grow with AI in an effective way. The only other thing, too, here to talk about, since you brought it up, is making sure that we could figure out an environmental way at being able to provide the solution to this from an energy providing standpoint, and not that it actually, to do anything, to just answer one simple prompt, is like an equivalent of a bottle of water. And, there's so much wattage that's being used. Sustainability is the word, really. But out of that, what's out of this whole conversation, what do you hope people remember? Just if it was just one thing out of this whole conversation, what should it be?
So one of the, you know, kind of industry trends and thing I'm excited about beyond, of course, AI, which, is a whole episode in unto itself. I do take some, kind of excitement and some comfort in seeing that. Whereas when I first started in this journey, talking about and working with the nervous system was sort of fringe or unusual, or not really a point of emphasis. Now it's sort of more mainstream or trendy or on people's minds, or whatever the right word is. So I like that you know the neuroscience in the context of mental and physical health and recovery, is so much more relevant and top of mind for people. So I really like that, and I hope that's one thing that you know people take from this is the value and the importance of working with the nervous system. And related to that, is pain. We didn't really talk about like the neuroscience of pain, but it's really fascinating because when we understand that pain is not just a passive reaction to something hurting in the body, but pain is an active signal created by the brain. It's part of the same protective pattern that we talked about, how the brain and nervous system can create patterns of weakness or tension to guard and protect the body. Pain is part of that, and pain is a response to a perceived threat. And understanding that framework can give us really good tools and techniques and frameworks and mindsets for addressing pain, and give us a little more sense of control and agency.
It's also emotional and
Mm-hmm.
besides mechanical.
Yeah.
So it could be, it can cause people, um, you know, negative emotional responses can alter posture, could alter the autonomic nervous system in a way where it impacts organ health, um, blood glucose response. It's been shown, so yeah, pain in itself is a massive topic because it's physical and it's mental. And once you have those things, right, and let's associate it with, being an athlete. I'm sure Saquon, every time he steps on the field, has to feel 100% confident that he can pivot and cut and explode through a tackle, and then having, because there's that mental side that you'll start questioning every single time. Structural health, and that's why, that's what injuries do. You know, it, those are all things associated with that thing of, that term pain. But yeah, it is I think that's one important takeaway here of what it is, because it's not only neurological in nature, but it's also physiological outcome that is associated with it. So if you hear something or it reminds you, if you smell something, it could induce that as well, which I think that's what the beauty of the human body is. It's like, wow, like I have those moments, like I step out into the football field or a locker room and I smell that it's like I already have like a heightened heart rate response. I have already adrenaline pumping. It's the same thing with a gym environment. You go to a gym and that's exactly the same outcome. So that's a great, great takeaway. Um, if people want to find out more about you and Newbie itself, where should they go?
On social media, we're most active on Instagram. I just, in the last year or so, started a personal page. It's Garrett.Salpeter. I'd love to interact with you there. And then our company page is NeuFit, NEU, like neurological, FIT, and then RFP for rehab, fitness, and performance. And
I'll add those links as well to the show notes.
oh, good, thank you. And then website, if you're interested in finding a provider near you, or interested if you are a provider and interested in bringing this into your own business or practice, our website is www.new.fit, again, neu.fit. And there's a link to connect us and also learn more and see some of the research and various things we've talked about here.
Awesome. Well, again, really, thank you. I definitely would love to talk to you again. I think that pain topic might be a great topic to jump back into as a follow-up to this discussion.
Yeah, for sure. I appreciate you having me on, Marcelo, and thank you everybody for tuning in. It's great being here.
Thank you. All right, I'm